Boy the Wandering Dog by Marshall Saunders. Chapter 4. My New Master. I jumped up on the window seat and looked about me. Some men have comforts, some don't. This man had a beautiful room overlooking the river, with a nice white bathroom off it. He splashed and tumbled about in the water, then he dressed himself, and all the while he examined me. I licked a few stray hairs in place, and took some mud off my paws with my tongue, to let him see I was as clean in my ways as he was. I knew he would not associate with me if I was a dirty dog. "Boy," he said at last, "I like you. Do you like me?" I stood up straight, and put my two front paws as far up on his chest as they would go. I loved him. He was handsome, intellectual, and unhappy. Not that he looked unhappy. He had rather an amused face, but we dogs see below the surface. "Suppose you stay here till breakfast is over," he remarked. "No use in bringing on scenes. You're not hungry, are you?" I shook my head, and curled up on the window seat. He went away, and stayed a short time. I smelt coffee and steak somewhere near, but I never budged, and after a while he came back. "Suppose you go downtown with me, dog," he said. "The probability is that you would not spend a very interesting morning with Madame and Beanie." He grinned, and I grinned. Then at last he walked boldly out with me at his heels. We met the lady in the hall, looking perfectly stunning in some kind of a light-colored morning gown. Dogs don't have much of an eye for color. In fact, most of us are color blind. "Rudolph," she screamed, "didn't you turn that ugly dog out?" He looked over his shoulder. "Oh, he's still there, is he? Likely he'll leave me downtown and run home. Au revoir, dearie. Don't overexert." She bent her cheek, and he pecked at it. Then he went downstairs, and there at the door was such a jolly, seven-seated motor car. Not a limousine, thank fortune. I hate to drive in a glass box. The man ran his own car, and I sat between him and the chauffeur. Oh, what fun! We went flying down Riverside Drive till we couldn't fly any longer, and we had to turn into 72nd Street and go soberly. Finally we got away downtown. So my new master was a businessman. "What will you do?" he said, when we at last pulled up before a skyscraper. "Go to the garage with Louis, or come with me." As if there was any comparison between him and Louis. I snuggled close to his smart-looking shoes and silk socks, and together we went in and up to a suite of offices where young men, elderly men, stenographers, and messengers hummed, and buzzed, and worked, and talked, till 1 o'clock. I lay under the swivel chair in my new master's inner office, and enjoyed it all. I love to see human beings working hard. At 1 o'clock my master rose, and leaving this hive of industry behind him, went out for lunch. I have had training enough for 10 dogs, and my new master guessed it. He never looked behind, and I never looked before. I kept my muzzle at his shoe heels, and we passed leisurely through the swarms of bees from other hives that were buzzing through halls and in elevators. All were after honey, and we found a particularly agreeable place for ours. To my astonishment, when our turn came to enter an elevator, we did not go down to the street, but up to the top of the high building we were in. What a surprise awaited me there! I knew there were restaurants and roof gardens in New York, but I had never been in one. I had been in a nice restaurant in San Francisco at the top of a big building, and I was there on the day of a slight earthquake, when the whole body of waiters, who wore mustaches, rushed down to the street, shaved their mustaches off, and went back to a famous club from which they had been discharged because they would wear those same mustaches. Well, something very fine awaited us at the top of this New York building. We stepped out of the elevator, went through a door, and there we were on top of the enormous skyscraper, and spread out before us was a view of wonderful New York, less wonderful Brooklyn, the Jersey coast, and the magnificent bay and islands. Master had allowed me to jump on a chair so I could look about me, for dogs, unless they stand high, often lose a view that a human being can enjoy. I was enchanted, but the wind blew so hard that I was glad to jump down and follow my new master into a protected place. Here were tables, chairs, mirrors, a regular, attractive, and pretty restaurant, better than any we would find on the street in this downtown district. It was enclosed by glass, and from nearly all the seats one could enjoy the same magnificent view that one had outside. My master did not stay in this eating place, which I learned afterward was for all the people in the building. He passed through a long corridor, went down some steps, along a covered walk, all this was glassed in, and to the top of a lower building. Indeed, it seemed to me that we were passing over the tops of many buildings, and I found out afterward that this was correct. Mr. Granton, for this was my master's name, and some other men had acquired the right to build on the tops of the skyscrapers, and here they had an agreeable promenade in fresh air, and away from the dust of the street. At last we entered a pretty little café, furnished in Louis something or other style. Well, attached to this dainty little café, with its mirrors and spindle-legged tables and chairs, was a tiny formal rose garden with real flowers and gravel walks. The whole thing reminded me of Paris, and I soon found out that it was a French restaurant, and that my master, who had been partly educated in France, loved the French people. He had his lunch at a small table by himself, drawn up close to the entrance of the garden, and I sat under his chair and inhaled the perfume of the roses and gazed at the pretty thing with ecstasy. It was enclosed by lattice work entwined with green leaves, and all round the lattice work ran a deep bed of flowering roses. On looking closely, I found that they were in pots sunk in trenches. However, the effect was of a regular out-of-door flowering garden. In the middle was a round bed with a pink rambler climbing round a sundial. In one corner was a baby pergola with another climber embracing it, and at the top of the pergola a tiny little bird box, out of which frequently stepped a wee yellow canary. He had a box of seeds fastened to the pergola, and when he wanted a drink he went to a tiny fountain in one corner of the garden. While my master was eating, this little bird sang to him, but did not offer to come near him. It was not afraid of him, for Mr. Canary regarded the garden as his home. Neither was he afraid of me, knowing he had wings, and then, though he was only a mite of a creature, he knew my attitude was not threatening. He had a little mate among the roses, but she did not come out, merely peeped at us. Master had rather a dainty lunch for such a big man. Mine was dainty too, a little too dainty for a medium-sized dog, for Monsieur Canovel, who ran the café, had a Frenchman's frugal ways. However, the garçon sneaked me a few extras. These foreigners that come round, smirking and bowing and hoping that everything is to Monsieur's liking, are really not as satisfactory as Americans, who apparently scarcely glance at their patrons, yet if a prominent one brings in a dog, say, "Waiter, give him a plateful." I love to run over the names of things to eat. Even the sound is appetizing, so I will say that master had bouillon and vegetables served separately, and then French stew, and a dish which smelt like those delicious things made of hard crusts of bread which poor children pick out of the gutters in Paris and sell to the restaurants, where they are washed and ground and made into little pies. Nobody saves crusts in this country. We Americans, dogs and human beings, are too extravagant. A French dog could live on the discards from my table. After master had his lunch, he strolled about the gravelled walks of the tiny garden that was not much bigger than Gringo's yard, for only 25 men used this pretty place. He did not smoke. He whistled to the canary, who knew him, and got angry when master picked a rose from his pergola and put it in his buttonhole. After a while, a gentleman who had been lunching at a table near us came over to my master and began to talk about his arcade scheme, which I soon found out was a plan to lessen the crowds on the streets of New York by building arcades like those on the Rue de Rivoli in Paris, except that the top would be flat so that people could walk on them too. "It would give a double row of storefronts," said my master's friend, "and increase the value of second-story property. How much will you put in, Granton?" Master said he would consider it. "In addition," went on his friend, "I have a plan to force the owners of apartment houses to build kennels and runways on the tops of their houses, so that dogs owned by tenants can be exercised there instead of in the street, where they have to wear muzzles." Master smiled and said, "That's more in my line. Let me know when you want to get that law passed." Then he nodded good-bye to his friend, and we sauntered back along the roofs to the elevator and descended to our hive. He worked with the other bees till 5, when we swarmed to the street. There was Louis with the car. I jumped up beside Master, and we wended our way uptown to Madame. I gathered from Mr. Granton's remarks that he took her out nearly every day. On arriving before the apartment house, he murmured, "Suppose you get under Louis's lap-robe." Then he added, "No, we might as well have it out, first as last." When Madame came out with Beanie toddling after her, she stopped and gave a squeal at sight of me. "Rudolph, didn't that ugly thing leave you?" I bridled. I'm doggy in appearance, still I'm not ugly, I'm distinguished. One of the garçons at the French restaurant said I looked like a chien de race, and he was more right than he knew. "Clossie," said my master, "I like this dog." "I can't help that," she said in her trailing voice. "I know he'll kill my darling boy." At sight of his wife, my master had jumped from the car and stood on the sidewalk. "Permit me," he said, and leaning across her, he took young Fatty Beans and put him on the seat beside me. The lady gave a shriek and covered her eyes with her little white gloves. When she looked up, young Beans sat beside me, straight as a major. I had hissed in his ear, "If you don't pretend to like me, I'll knock the stuffing out of you first chance I get." The young fellow didn't want to get unstuffed, so he turned to his mistress with a sickly grin. "Why, darling," she said slowly, "I believe you like him. Was he lonely doggy by his own, Cephas?" He hadn't been a lonely doggy by his own, Cephas, but he was too frightened to tell her so, and if he had, she didn't possess enough knowledge of dogs to understand him. With a wondering face, Madame stepped in beside her husband, who had taken his old place. "Now what about the dog?" she asked. "I was planning to take Beanie in here with me as usual, but perhaps he'd rather sit with his new friend." "By all means," said her husband hastily. "Let them both go with Louis." Louis was a splendidly trained servant. When Madame talked dog talk, he was convulsed with inward laughter, but he showed no outward trace, except by a tremor of the eyelid. But when he got with other chauffeurs, ma foi! You'd die laughing to hear him imitate her. But he liked Mrs. Granton all the time. I found out that later. After a time we set out, Madame and Monsieur in front, Louis and dogs behind. Louis liked me, but he used to pinch Beans slyly. Poor Beanie, he didn't enjoy that first drive. I was dying to know some friends of my new family. Fortunately, we met one who was walking down the drive with a collie dog at her heels. Oh, what a keen, intelligent Scottish face he had! And hers was just as keen and intelligent an American face. My master stopped the car, and his wife called out, "Why, how do you do, Stanna? Want to have a spin with us?" Miss Stanna, all laughing and rosy in her black furs, pointed to her dog. "Sir Walter Scott wouldn't like that. He's out for his constitutional." "See our new dog?" continued Madame. "He's absolutely forced himself on us." Miss Stanna gave me a sharp glance. I gave her one. She understood dogs, too. I got up and stretched my neck toward her. "Later on, dog," she said, and she waved her hand toward me. "I'll be charmed to have a talk with you." Then she called out, "Good-bye, Clossie and Rudolph. Good-bye, dogs," and she strolled on. We went on our way, twisting and turning, but always gliding so smoothly about this wonderful city. Is it because it is so big that one doesn't get tired of New York? We had gone away out to Van Cortlandt Park, and were thumping along a bit of bad road between the sad trees with their scant covering of dry leaves, when, to my dismay, we came suddenly abreast of another car in which sat one of my former owners, whom I had not treated very well. End of chapter 4.
Chapter 5. An Old Friend and an Adventure. Before I had time to dodge under the lap-robe, Miss Brighteyes caught sight of me. That was what I always called her, because she had such piercing shoe–buttons of eyes. Her real name was Purcell, and she was a native daughter of the Golden State. Her grandfather had been an old 49er, who had made a fortune in land. "Why, Mrs. Granton," she giggled, "I think I see an old friend with you. Where did you get him?" Mrs. Granton did not at first understand her. Then she said, "Oh, you mean the dog. Louis, make him stand up, so Miss Purcell can see him. Do tell us something about him." "See him wiggle and fawn," said Miss Brighteyes. "Oh, he is a rogue. I had him for a whole year, and gave him the best time a dog ever had. We never could make out why he ran away from us." Mr. Granton spoke up. "Do you mean to say you had this dog out in California?" "Yes," she replied, "in Los Angeles. We used to have such fun. We'd motor to Santa Monica, and go in bathing, and doggie had such good times. What made you leave me, pup?" And she surveyed me good–naturedly. How I longed for the power of speech! She was a fresh–air and fresh–water fiend. She used to take me in bathing with her, and make me dive under the breakers, and she put cotton–wool in her own ears, but never a spear in mine, and I got deaf. And then her old man–servant used to bathe me in the garage, and get soap in my eyes with his wobbly old hands, and I got angry, and cleared out. I am a clean dog, but I don't want the hide scoured off me." Mr. Granton gave me one of his penetrating glances. Then he said to Miss Brighteyes, "Do you think the dog was happy with you?" "Happy? Certainly," she replied. "Everything was done for him." I barked protestingly. "Tell us how you treated him," said Mr. Granton. "Well, as soon as I had my breakfast, he was with me till lunch–time, walking or driving. Then he spent the rest of the day with the servants." "Interesting servants?" pursued Mr. Granton. "Well, not particularly. All old ones. They belonged to my grandmother." "Hum," murmured Mr. Granton thoughtfully. "And he would be younger then than he is now, and he's lively yet. Where did you get him?" "Bought him from a man in the street," said Miss Purcell. "He said he found him running about without a collar. He has lots of tricks. Jump out, dog, and let me put you through some of your stunts." I was quite stiff from sitting so long, but I wanted to please Mr. Granton, so I sprang out to a bit of level ground, and danced on my hind legs, rolled over, did dead dog, howled an operatic air with one paw on my chest, and wound up with some double somersaults. The Grantons laughed heartily, but Beanie was nearly suffocated with jealousy, and when I got back beside him and Louis, he bit me. What a nip he got in return! Mrs. Granton screamed at his loud howl, and turning round, reproached Louis for not taking better care of him. Louis pressed his gloved hand to his mouth, and said in a choked voice, "Beg pardon, ma'am, I accidentally squeezed his ear with my arm." Then he gave me a poke with his elbow, and said, "No more of that, you young spitfire." We went spinning towards Yonkers after we left Miss Purcell, and just after getting beyond it, had an adventure. We were on a fine piece of road. What magnificent roads they are building, and so quickly too, outside most American cities. Then we came to a big, powerfully ugly, red brick house, standing in its own grounds. "Oh!" exclaimed Mrs. Granton, "suppose we call on the Johnsons. It's just about afternoon tea–time." Mr. Granton didn't want to, but she made him do it. We rolled up to the porte–cochère, but master was going to have his own way in something, and when she wanted to take Beanie in, he wouldn't let her. So Louis and I and Beanie were instructed to take a little spin down the road, and come back in 20 minutes. Just after we left the red brick house we came to a long level bit of road, and Louis was speeding up a bit, when I pulled his sleeve. Off on our right was a sheet of water with a man in it, yelling his head off for help. Louis was out of the machine like a shot, and I after him. Beanie sat blinking. I can see him now, the silly ass. The little French chauffeur danced about at the edge of the water, like a monkey on hot bricks. Before I came to New York there had been quite a time of sharp weather, and ice had formed. This foolish fellow in the water had taken his skates and gone off to have a little fun by himself. Now he was splashing about, postponing his final going under as long as possible. "Hold on! Hold on!" called Louis. "I'm coming!" But instead of coming he went smashing through the thin ice just as often as he stepped on it. I learned afterward that he was a fine swimmer and quite an athlete, but what could he do when he couldn't get to the man? He had thrown his cap and coat on the ground, and seizing his hair by both hands, he whirled round and round in the road, in his uncertainty. Not a soul was in sight. Fortunately his desperate eyes fell on the extra tire at the back of the car. In a twinkling he had it off, and lashed to it a rope that Mr. Granton always has him carry in the car. The marvellous thing was that he hadn't thought of the rope first. Master would have if he'd been there. Well, it wasn't too late now, and didn't he hurl that tire at the poor drowning man, who had just enough strength left to cling to it. Then Louis, playing the man as one would a salmon, tried to haul him in. He is as slight as a girl, and couldn't do it. He tugged and panted and groaned and called out, but no one came, and I suppose we had passed thousands of cars that afternoon. Finally Louis had another bright idea. He tied the rope to the car, sprang to his seat, and off he started, looking frequently over his shoulder. He easily motored the man to land, then springing from the car, took hold of him to support his half-fainting body to the car. It isn't necessary to report what he said when he found the man was an enormously fat lady with bloomers on. However, with some help from her, he tugged her into the car and laid her on the floor of it, under the surprised Beanie, who sat on the seat, looking as if he had seen a ghost. Then didn't we fly to the brick house! I ran after the car, and hadn't a bit of breath left when we got there. The people came running out, and lifted the fat lady in, who, it seems, was a very important person, an English suffragette who had come to this country because she wouldn't stop throwing bricks at shop windows in England. She was a guest in the house, and her name was Lady Serena Glandison. She was also to give a lecture that night in New York. I heard the Grantons talking about it afterward. The man said she was a dead game sport, for she persisted in giving the lecture. She wanted to reduce her flesh, and had gone off to have some quiet little skate by herself, not being particularly beautiful in bloomers. Wasn't she grateful to Louis? She said most undoubtedly she would have drowned, but for him. She sent him a cheque for $1,000, and he is to get more later on, when women get the vote in England, and she doesn't have to spend so much in fines for her pastime of window smashing. "If they ever do," said my master. I may add that Lady Serena is an ultra who wouldn't stop her militant work on account of the war. She says she can see lots of reasons for smashing windows, but none for smashing men's ribs. So she came to America to wait for the fighting to be over in Europe. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. Beanie loses his home. A week or two went by, and I was as happy as a king, maybe I'd better say a president, as kings don't seem to be getting much fun out of life at present. I had had many homes, many masters and mistresses, but never a master like this one. He just suited me. I often used to wonder what it was about him that made me like him so much. I had seen men just as handsome, just as amiable, just as lovable. There was something I could not explain about it. When he looked at me with his deep-set grey eyes, I felt that I could die for him. He was my man affinity. He understood me, and he never believed anything against me unless it was very fully proved, and then he always forgave me. His confidence in me made me want to be a better dog, and I stopped nipping Beanie on the sly, and gave up stealing Mrs. Granton's gloves and chewing them up. I didn't like her, and she didn't like me. What could you make of a woman who insisted upon being called Clossie instead of Claudia, which was her real name? Claudia has some dignity to it, but Clossie, it didn't sound to me like a lady, and master just hated it, but he had to say it. They didn't get on very well together. I often heard the servants talking about it. Louis was for mistress, and the cook and the waitress and the girl who came to do mistress's hair and finger–nails were for master. "She's a fraud," said cook emphatically. "A woman her age ain't got no business lazing in bed till all hours of the morning, and when she gets up, what does she do? Fools around, putting in time, and then travels down town and wastes money shopping or goes to the theatre." "She don't do nothing for nobody all day long," the waitress would break in. "It's self, self, self. Do I look pretty? Is my skin all right? Am I getting old? Bah! I'd like to give her a job scouring brasses." Then Louis would stand up for her. "The old man's clever." I regret to say they usually called master the old man, and mistress Mrs. Puttyface. "Why don't he make more of her? If she was my wife, I'd teach her things. Why don't he point out things on the river when they're motoring? And do he ever read to her of an evening?" He never did, but the maids wouldn't tell him this. So Louis, who was a French–American, speaking fairly good English with here and there a funny mistake, went on, "When I comes in for orders, there he sits, glooming one side of the fire, she the other, the table atween them. Man and wife should be close up, and speaking betimes." "She ain't got no language," said cook. "She never does talk but of fooleries." "She stands for her dog," said Louis feebly, for the women always out–talked him. Here the young girl who did her hair and nails, and who used to come out to the kitchen for a cup of tea, made a very dismal prophecy about Beanie that unfortunately came true. "Just listen to me," she said, wrinkling her dark eyebrows. "That woman ain't got no thought for anything but herself. Husband, help, dog, she'd see you all in the Hudson, and never lift a finger to save you. Why, that fat dog comes between her and a table or a chair in the bedroom that she's making for, he gets a push that lands him most into the next room. If she took it into her head to get rid of him, out he'd go." Louis was sweet on this girl, and he smiled at her. "I never saw no kicking from her," he remarked amiably. "Mrs. Puttyface has been kind along to me. I often gets a tip. Maybe she'll make good yet. She's young, ain't she?" This brought on a long tiresome argument. When the maids got on mistress's clothes or her age, I always left the kitchen. Why don't they talk about the war or politics, instead of that eternal drivel about master and mistress? The two people at the head of the establishment never mentioned them, nor looked at them, except to ask for something. I wonder whether that was not one reason why there was not more sympathy between the working end and the commanding end of the house. I had been in several homes before this, where there was criticism between employer and employed, but a criticism softened by sympathy and mutual interest. I blamed mistress. Down at the café the servants were never familiar with the gentlemen patrons, but there was a good spirit prevailing, and I heard no hateful remarks there. The gentlemen were kind to the garçons in a quiet way, and the garçons were respectful to the gentlemen, and they got their reward. For once, when one of them fell ill, the gentlemen clubbed together and sent him to a beautiful place in the country. To come back to Beanie, I had noticed for several days that mistress hadn't been talking silly talk to him, and usually left him home, when she went out in the car. He wasn't apprehensive about it. His too solid flesh made him a stupid dog. He was simply annoyed to miss his outing. However, to give him credit, he never said a word against his mistress. He just plodded round the apartment after her, never doubting that she adored him as much as she said she did. One evening, when she was sitting with her two pretty light slippers stretched out toward the wood fire in the fireplace, she said suddenly, "Rudolph, I'm going to change Beanie and get a toy Pomeranian." Mr. Granton turned round and said, "What?" He was sitting, as he usually did, beside a little table which had a shaded electric light on it. He was reading a book about the war, and sometimes stopped to gaze thoughtfully in the fire. Mrs. Granton wouldn't talk about it to him. All she knew about the fighting in Europe was that it would stop for a time her yearly visits to Paris to buy gowns. He was staring at her. Finally he said, "I thought you were fond of Beanie." "I thought I was," she said carelessly. "But Poms are more fashionable, and smaller. Beanie's too fat to carry, and I think a small dog under the arm looks smart." "What will you do with Beanie?" asked Mr. Granton. "Sell him, of course. I'll get a good price. I gave $200 for him. I'll send him to a vet to be starved for a while. He's too fat now." Upon my word, I was sorry for Beanie. He sat listening to her as if he could scarcely believe his ears. The poor simpleton had so presumed on the fact of her loving him. I could have told him long ago he was in a dog-fooled paradise. Mr. Granton opened his mouth, as if to say something. Then he shut it again. He took up his book and went on reading about the war, till Mrs. Granton's smacking of her lips over her chocolates and novel got on his nerves. It usually did about 11 o'clock. He got up, looked out of the window, and said, "I think I'll take a walk." Then he said carelessly, "Have you quite made up your mind to sell your dog?" "Quite," she said, smiling and showing her pretty teeth. She was really very pinky sweet and lovely, if she had only had a mind in her doll body. "And you would be satisfied with $200? "I'd be satisfied with $150, she said. "He's no longer quite young, according to looks. His amount of flesh ages him." Beanie gasped and panted by the fire, and finally went to hide his shamed head in the corner. "I suppose you know he understands all this," said Mr. Granton. "I don't believe it," she said. "He's only a dog." This roused poor young Beans. He waddled up to her, rose on his hind legs, and laid his 2 forepaws on her lap. His mouth was wide open, and he was panting heavily, trying to look engaging and fascinating, and succeeding only in looking silly. "Go away, you little fool," she said, pushing him aside. "I've taken a dislike to you." Beanie went to hide his diminished head under the sofa. Mr. Granton was drawing a fountain pen from his pocket and a little book. He wrote out a cheque for $150 and gave it to her. "You might have made it 200," she said peevishly. He smiled. He was too good a man of business to pay more for a thing than he had to, even to his own wife. "Your dog is mine now," he said. "Very well," she replied carelessly. "And mind, I don't want that fat awkward thing round this apartment. We've too many dogs now," and she glared at me. She had never forgiven me for staying with her husband, and I knew, and he knew, that she was jealous of me. "I'll find him a home," said Mr. Granton. "Come on, Beans, since you're my dog now, come out and take a walk with Boy and me." He always called me Boy or Boy Dog. He said I was too clever to be just plain Dog. I hate sorrow and suffering and ugly things. With my tail between my legs, I slunk after my master. I didn't like to look at Beanie. He was behind me, poor, poor young dog, prematurely aged on account of the overfeeding, over-petting, and over-everything of a foolish mistress, and now shaken out of his paradise. He looked frightfully, but he made an effort to hold himself up, and waddled toward the elevator with us. When we got in the street, Mr. Granton said kindly, "I'll carry you a while, old man. You're rather knocked in a heap," and he actually took that fat young dog under his arm and walked block after block with him, till Beanie got back some of his usual complacent self-possession. Then he put him down and walked slower than usual, in order to accommodate his new acquisition. I walked close to Beanie, and from time to time touched his head with my muzzle. "Cheer up, young fellow," I said. "You're lucky to have changed hands. You would have been dead in a few months. You're all out of condition. Master will get you a good home." "I don't want another home," he said miserably. "I want my old one, and I love my mistress." "In spite of the way she's treated you?" I asked. "That doesn't make any difference with a dog," he replied. "It would with me," I said. "You're not an ordinary dog," he said. "You're an exception." "I believe that's true," I said. "I wonder where we're going?" "I don't know, and I don't care. he said wretchedly, and he plodded along like a machine. Master had left Riverside Drive, and was going slowly up 139th Street. Soon we were in the shadow of Great Hall of the College of New York. Some one was playing the organ, and through an open door we could catch the solemn strains of some dirge-like music. Master stood still for a while, either to listen or to breathe the panting Beanie, whose eyes were dim with tears, as he looked not at the white-picked stone mass of the building, but down at the cold stone pavement. Presently we went on with our faces to the east. Now it dawned upon me where we were going. I jumped and frisked about my master. How clever he was! He had remembered old Ellen's address. She was just the one to soothe and comfort poor Beanie. "See what a nice wide avenue you're going to live on," I said to Beanie. "There's no view of the river," he muttered. I sighed. There's no comforting a dog with a broken heart. He did cheer up a bit when we got into Ellen's flat. How glad she was to see my master! Not cringingly glad, but glad in a nice, affectionate way colored people have towards those they like. She was sitting in one of those big rocking chairs in her tiny kitchen, and had evidently been looking out the window at the crowds of people sauntering to and fro on the brightly lighted avenue. This was a great place for the colored persons employed among whites to come to see their friends and families, and on a fine evening they did a good deal of their talking in the street. Master motioned her back to her chair, and he took Robert Lee's rocker at the other little window. "I have brought you a present," he said, and he glanced at Beanie and me as we lay at his feet. Old Ellen's face glowed. "A present? For me, sir? May the Lord bless you!" "It's alive," said my master, and he pointed to Beanie. Ellen almost screamed. "Sir! Not that lovely fat dog?" Master nodded, and she swooped down on Beanie and took him, troubles and all, right up in her ample lap. It reminded me of the song she sang me when I was here before. "Take up de young lambs, tote 'em in your bosom, and let de old sheep go." Beanie's whole soul was shrinking from her, but he put a steady face on his troubles, and even curled his short lip gratefully at her. She began to sway to and fro, rubbing her bleached old hand over his tired head. "Don't let him out alone," said my master. "He might run home." Ellen's face was almost silly with happiness. "There ain't no little pickaninny in New York that'll have the 'tention this little master dog will have," she said earnestly. She always began to talk in a southern way when she saw master. I think he recalled her old employers down south. "How will you feed him?" asked my master. "He has quite a good appetite." Ellen looked master all over with the good-natured cunning of her race. "Sir," she said, "you looks like the gentleman down south. You wouldn't let your little dog suffer nohow, even if it was Ellen's." Master laughed heartily. He loved frankness and hated deceit. "Ellen," he said, "that dog will have a limited income as long as he lives. It will be paid weekly, and you will have to go to an address I will give you to get it. As he enjoys driving, I will have a carriage call for you once a week, and you can take Beans with you to report for himself." Old Ellen didn't know what to say. She looked everywhere, all round the room, out the window, down at the dog in her lap, and hard at me, as I sat staring at her. Finally she got up, put Beanie down, and said quietly, "Sir, would you like a cup of coffee?" "Very much," he replied. Ellen lighted her gas stove, got out the big pot, made the coffee, and handed him a cup and saucer that she took from a cupboard in the wall. Master handled it in surprise. "This is Sèvres," he said, "and costly." "Sir," she said solemnly, "that was a present from my old mistress, whose heart was broke by de war." Master held the cup out from him, as if he dreaded to touch his lips to it. "But," said old Ellen, in the queer, mysterious voice negroes can assume, "happiness come afore she died. Sir, is you happy?" The big old negress suddenly towered over my master, and laid a hand on his head. "No, Ellen," he said quite simply, "God knows I'm not happy." The old woman stared up at the ceiling, and her eyes became quite glassy. "Oh, Lord," she said with a frightful fervour, "drive away de clouds from poor master's heart. Bring him light. It's coming. Oh, Lord, I see it coming like de wings of an eagle. I see it a–swooping right down on master, dear good man." And suddenly, turning her back on him, she began to clap her hands. Master drank his coffee and never said a word. I had been with him long enough to know that he was a very unemotional man, and yet he was all alive with tenderness inside. He had a little superstition too, for he was watching Ellen from the corner of his eye, and was pleased by her interest in him. Finally he got up and went over to poor young Beans, who lay in the chair, taking no stock in all this sentiment. "Good–bye, my dog," he said. "You're young. You'll get over this." Beans, of course, tried to follow us from the room. Our last sight of him was at the head of the staircase, struggling in old Ellen's arms. "Dog, dog," she said rebukingly, "old Ellen knows. There's a cloud going to burst over you all, mister and dog, and it's full o' blessings." My master smiled at intervals all the way home. He always made for Riverside Drive, and never stayed any longer than he could help in the blocks and blocks of streets between it and East River. This night there were heavy masses of clouds over the river, but just before we got home the moon broke through and showed a superb, smiling face. My master paused, and leaning both elbows on the stone parapet, stared at the moon. "Suppose it should come," he murmured. "Perfect happiness, in the right way. The only way it could come now is a wrong way." His voice was frightfully sad and perplexed. How I longed to comfort him! But I was only a dog. And moreover, I didn't know all his troubles. I was pretty sure they weren't money troubles. I did all I could. I jumped up and licked his hand. "Boy," he said, withdrawing his gaze from the moon to look at me, "you're the greatest comfort I have." Wasn't I proud and happy? I almost wriggled myself out of my body. With a beautiful smile, but a heavy sigh, he turned, and we started toward home, which we did not reach without a further adventure. CHAPTER 7